Hey y'all, it's Zekasis, and I wanted to touch base once again. We've been talking about the theme of release. About 4, almost 5 months ago at this point, I was sharing about what release meant to me. I was defining it in my own words, through my own experience, through my own lens, and I talked about what it meant to let go. So, letting go patterns, behaviors, attitudes, mindsets, narratives, especially false narratives, and what that kind of looked like and what that felt like. And it sometimes, of course, it's uncomfortable but necessary to identify what no longer serves you well, with the understanding that it's not shirking responsibility, it's not removing accountability, but identifying, hey, this mindset or maybe this place I frequent or maybe the people I surround myself with are people that do not serve me well, do not have my best interests in mind, do not prioritize my well-being, and so I need to let it go. And so we went from the idea of letting it go to surrendering, and that was in more recent times, and what it means to surrender to God, what it means to surrender to flow, to understand that things sometimes are outside of our control. Sometimes there are external circumstances and factors that are at play. And so learning the art of flowing and learning the art of surrendering as a form of release. And so we talked about that in my last video. Most recently, I talked about forgiveness and how we release through forgiveness, how we forgive ourselves for things we've done, for ideas or narratives we have received and then, like sponges, really pulled into and held onto that weren't necessarily indicative of who we are or the expression of our authenticity. And so how we need to learn to forgive ourselves but also forgive others, but especially us. And then the other idea I had, and I was thinking about this for a little bit, was the marrying of our expectations with realities. So understanding full stop, understanding in totality what it means to have our expectations and the realities of what it is come together in a union. So I was like, okay, what does that really mean, like a union? So I looked up the Webster Merriam definition, and a union means the action of joining together or the fact of being joined together. So we have our expectations on one side, we have the realities on the other side, and how we can come together, how we can join them, how we can make sense of what we think are the ideals or the notations or the notions of what we think should happen, what we think is going to happen versus what actually it is. And so I often tell clients and friends and family members, like, marry your expectations with the reality. Marry them. So marriage, one of the definitions in Webster Merriam of marriage is a combination or mixture of elements. So in this equation, in this example, the elements are our expectations and the actual realities. Expectation being a strong belief that something will happen or it will be the case. And then you have reality, the state of things as they actually exist, as opposed to an idealistic or notional idea of them. So when we talk about expectations versus realities, a lot of times we have an idea of, oh, by this age I'm supposed to be doing this, by this age this is supposed to be accomplished, so I need to have these degrees by this certain time, or I need to be married by this certain time, or I need to have children by this certain time, or I need to have this milestone accomplished by this certain time. And sometimes our expectations and our beliefs and our ideas about who we are or how we want to express or show up on any given day are not actually the realities of our life. And that is okay. So when we talk about release, we have to release even our expectations if they do not add up to the reality. And I'm not saying that means, oh, I want to be a rocket scientist, or I want to be a marine biologist, but I only have my associate's degree, so that's where I stop it at. No, it just means that sometimes our destination is not a straight and narrow path that we expect it to be. Sometimes there are detours along the way, but you still make it to your destination. But as we're traversing, we give ourselves grace. As we're traversing, we don't get caught up and why our expectations are not being met. Instead, we go, this is the reality and where we are. How do I then navigate? How do I then maneuver the space, the realities that are presented for me? As you all know, I talk often about some of the different experiences I've had when it comes to the medical and health. What are the realities versus what my expectations are? And so I talked last time about forgiveness and about, forgiving yourself for feeling like every single day you have to be on 158, or every single day you're going full throttle, every single day you're not giving yourself grace, or you're not pacing yourself, or you're not taking time to really just sit in your sacred rest and be reflective of where you are, what you've accomplished, so that you then celebrate your milestones. So it's not as easy to fall into those snares, or easy to fall into those abyss or those traps where you're like, oh, I'm not doing enough, I'm not giving enough, I need to be da-da-da. So when you stop long enough to realize, hey, I'm actually in a space, here are the realities, here were my expectations, and here are the realities. Let me make sense of it. That is a form of release. It's a form of release when you identify, hey, I might not be doing A, B, and C like I want to, but I'm actually doing A and B, and so I can get to C. There's no point, there's no benefit, there's no positivity that will come out of you starting to ruminate on your expectations, whether they're met or not met, whether they're met within a time frame that you have outlined or not. There's no benefit from you going, oh, well, here are my expectations, here are my beliefs, and this hasn't happened, and da-da-da. Now you get into comparison, now you get into the trap of stagnation, because now I try to move, but I'm scared to move forward now, so now I'm just sitting. There's a difference between taking sacred rest and being stagnant. So once again, we talk about what are the expectations versus what are the realities, and where am I presently. And then as you're navigating this idea of marrying your expectations with the realities of life, you give yourself grace. I don't know how many times I have to repeat that. Give yourself grace. Because I often say, you teach people how to treat you. You teach people how to engage with you. If you're not giving yourself grace, if you're not forgiving yourself, if you're not being kind to yourself, what is the incentive? What is the example for others when they're engaging with you and they're interacting with you, if you yourself are not giving yourself grace, if you yourself are not taking time to take sacred rest, if you yourself are not acknowledging all the growth, all the steps you've made, whether they were your expectations that, hey, by 30, I'm going to be able to heal this generational trauma. By 30, I'm going to be able to do this. You're 36. You're 34. You're 44. You're 48. But you're still doing the necessary work, and so you acknowledge that. And so you allow the time for the expectations and the realities to be what they are, and you bring them together. And if you need to pivot, if you need to adjust, then you do so with grace, with kindness, with warmth for self. Because as you remain open to flow, it also allows you don't just flow outside of yourself, you flow within yourself. And you provide opportunity for people who are assigned to bless your life, assigned to confirm things in your life, assigned to be a part of your journey, whether it's long term or short term. You allow that flow with more ease. And so I say, learn your spiritual, learn your emotional ebb and flow, what that looks like. And as you're doing your ebb and flow, it allows you to move and navigate in spaces that are uncomfortable. Spaces that are uncomfortable when you realize, oh, my expectations are not what the actual reality is. Oh, you've been in a career for 25 years and now you realize there is no fulfillment. You don't feel like it's purposeful. You don't feel like you are being fed mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You don't feel like you're being fed financially. And so it's time to pivot. It's time to adjust. But you've been working this career for over 25 years. Give yourself grace. Identify your expectations. Look at the realities. Marry them. And then adjust and adapt with grace so that you can identify what it is you need in this present season. That is a form of release. It's a form of release. It doesn't necessarily feel good. It's not necessarily comfortable, but it's necessary. When you plant seeds in the ground, you hope that the soil is fertile. You hope the seed of promise yields harvest, yields results. And so you do the necessary steps to water that seed and give light to that seed so that it can grow and yield what it is that you're trying to see come to fruition. It's the same thing with our hopes, our passions, our really like what we want to do with our gifted time on this earth. So what are the seeds that you're planting? What is the harvest that you're expecting? And if you plant garlic chives, or if you're planting spring onions and you get tomatoes, utilize the tomatoes. You pivot, you adjust, and you identify, oh, maybe I need to put the tomatoes in a potted area and then I need to remove them so they can stretch out because they got a lot of vines and a lot of roots. And so as you're looking at the expectation, you're like, I wanted garlic chives. I wanted spring onions, but I have tomatoes, which is the reality. What do I do with these tomatoes? And then what have I learned from this situation, from this circumstance, so then I can then inform myself, equip myself with the knowledge and understanding so then I can do something different in practical ways moving forward. A form of release. A form of release. And so what I'm really hoping for myself, but also for others, also for you, is that you identify what your expectations are or were, and then you identify what the actual realities are. What are the actuals that are happening, and how you can then blend the two. How the two can come together so that you are then informed about how you need to adjust or how you need to pivot while giving yourself grace. So if you have these expectations, whether they're lofty, whether they're realistic, but if you have these expectations, but they're rooted and contained and comprised of false narratives, or they're rooted in projections that others have put onto you, whether it's societal or familial, take note of that and then pivot and adjust. Releasing is healthy for you and healthy for those connected to you. So as you're releasing these false narratives, as you're releasing fear, as you're releasing shame that's typically coupled with projections from others outside of your being, or even sometimes within yourself. We're not always nice to ourselves. We don't always think nicely about ourselves, speak nicely about ourselves. When you have identified that, and then you realize, hey, what I'm carrying is not the actual reality. Do something different. Do something different so that you're living a more fulfilled, a more happy, and more purposeful life, rather than feeling like you're going through this cyclical experience of condemnation and frustration and stagnation. Take time to really identify what it is that you've been believing, what you've been expecting, and then what the reality is. So that when you are moving forward in your next season, your next chapter, you're able to do it with a clear mind and clear vision. As you're releasing, letting it go, as you're releasing, surrendering, as you're releasing forgiveness, as you're releasing, blending and marrying together your expectations with the actual realities, you're bringing more peace into your life. And you all know I love alliterations. I love acronyms. Not too many acronyms. You get into certain work job positions and you're like, God, so many acronyms. There's a plethora of acronyms. But peace, practicing equitable affinity consistently and enthusiastically. As you're releasing, as you're letting it go, as you're surrendering, as you're forgiving, as you're marrying your expectations with the realities, you're also bringing peace, and you're practicing peace. You're doing peace, practicing equitable affinity consistently and enthusiastically. That means in and out of season. That means when it's hard and when it's great. That means when it's joyous or when it's sorrowful. That means when it's easy and when it's difficult. You are practicing equitable affinity consistently and enthusiastically. And I think as you are incorporating peace, that acronym, into your life, that would be a cyclical, not just a cyclical, but it'd be like a sequential process, a part of that ebb and flow that you're doing, a part of that surrendering, or part of that letting go, but a part of that forgiveness, a part of that marrying expectations with realities. You'll find your natural, you'll find your spiritual, your emotional being. You'll find that ebb and flow so that you're adjusting and navigating as necessary. So, to surmise, to bring it all back together, this is just yet another definition of what release means to me, and it might resonate with you. But we're talking about letting it go as a form of release, surrendering as a form of release, forgiving as a form of release, and then blending and joining together your expectations with the realities as a form of release. I hope and pray for you peace in your life, that you are able, with full authenticity, with full expression, with full heart and soul and being, to practice equitable affinity consistently and enthusiastically in the various facets of your life. Sending you love, sending you care. I'll connect with you soon. As I mentioned, looking forward to sharing a testimony in the near future with you. But until then, give yourself grace. Prioritize your well-being. Take time to take sacred rest, because you cannot pour from an empty cup. And when you are depleted, you don't have energy to give and do. So, sending you love and care. Remember, do peace, incorporate peace in your life. Let go as you need to, surrender as you need to, forgive, and then join together your expectations with the realities. Much love.